Going for St. Louis.
No, it is not.
Okay, let's try
Ever since
this.
that door blew off, you knew someone wasn't paying attention.
Well, you knew when there were.
When the two airplanes exploded.
Planes exploded 4
Yeah,
or 5 years ago. I mean, you knew
Indeed.
that. We paid more attention to this one accident when the door blew off than we did to losing 2 planes because they were in different countries.
mhm.
We were so. oriented.
Or maybe we think there's more reason for a crash than a.
Oops, yeah, but it wasn't.
Maybe we didn't have the nails in the door.
This was so clear
Clearly somebody really messed up.
with the shortcuts and lack of attention to detail.
You don't think it was sabotage?
Wow.
Airbus.
Oh, no.
I mean, that's
Okay,
their.
Well, the kids flew back from France.
test. There
And
we
they
go.
loved it. Miles said it was really great.
Okay.
His trip was great.
Trip was great, plane was great, everything's great with Miles.
I love Miles.
15, just turned 15.
Oh, my.
Isn't it nice when a teenager is not depressed and angry and angry at the world? I mean, there are so many of them that are, I think.
The best thing I'm hearing in the news is that place after place, state after state, they're getting rid of the cell phones in school.
Yes, I heard some of it this morning.
Yeah, I just think it's so positive.
Uh-huh. Those of us who are tethered to ourselves.
Yes, those of us.
I shouldn't, I have to put this on quiet.
I don't know,
The kids at camp aren't allowed to have their phones. And one of the crazy things we realized
they're
is
fine.
they're totally fine. But the oldest kids going into 10th grade spend a month without their phones. That will probably be the longest for the rest of their lives that they are
Yes.
disconnected.
Yes.
Which is just wild to think about.
It's great fun to watch entering services. Who's scrolling?
Like
Well,
Leslie.
it's not kids.
No, I'm just.
Leslie.
No, Leslie, that's what I said. Yeah.
But she
Was Leslie Swole?
in services on.
Oh, Leslie's always on her phone.
During service?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh my God, the whole time. Yeah. You didn't realize this? Oh,
No,
yeah.
I'm always watching Mariah. She said, oh, I gotta answer the door or whatever, and scrolling. Yeah.
Welcome, everyone.
Whoops.
Oh. Okay, we have our new owl today. It's the beginning of this process, so hopefully.
My turn.
We've been your turn.
What do you mean, it's not your turn?
You're
It's
getting your
really my turn.
10,000 steps in.
Well, I got it.
It's really my turn, but you're taking it, thank you.
Exercise this morning, I'm not. I got my
Got your
exercise.
exercise in.
I feel like it's appropriate that I just made the determination that using the Tanakh felt sacrilegious as my laptop stand, but using the Zohar felt totally fine, which actually feels appropriate again for where we're at in Jewish history. Okay, let's see. No, except now it's going to the top of that. There we go. That's better. Oh, how's everyone doing?
Okay, boiling out there, but.
Oh, it's so hot.
It's-
It's so
It'll
hot.
cool down soon. We'll be fine.
The kids all back in school.
Kids are back in school. Gavi for the first time.
Yeah.
He was sick for,
Yeah, bacterial pneumonia. He had a fever for
They-
10 days or so.
really, that long?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah. Ez got it worse, but it didn't last for very
Yeah.
long. But he was up to a 103 and change. Poor kid.
But better now than before his bar mitzvah.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah. I know we were all so worried because we had meant to get the COVID shots in time to be
Safe.
safe for Gavi's bar mitzvah, and we just totally spaced. And then
No, you're gonna be tired of us next week. Tuesday, Wednesday.
Oh, I'm so excited. Next week it starts the Wednesdays.
Mhm.
Welcome, everyone. Folks are still actively jumping in. Oh, Samantha, I gotta let me co-host you.
Was it?
Tell us about what's starting on Wednesday, please.
Starting Wednesday this week, we are going to have Beit Midrash, which is a brand new program we're doing. I've mentioned this in other ways at TRC, but Wednesdays from 5 to 6 will be adult study Beit Midrash. I'm going to try to keep it topical, so every month it's going to swap up to something different. But the first month, September, will be spiritual preparation for the High Holy Days.
So that's starting next Wednesday.
Starting next Wednesday, correct?
Okay.
That's the one
Correct.
that you said adults, so I couldn't be there.
Exactly. Exactly.
You could make it meaningful for us.
So that will be just in person. That will not be streamed. And once the story of us is done, I've mentioned this again before, but story of us this Tuesday block is going to become Mishnah Torah, and that will be stream or online Zoom, but not in person. This is all a part of a broader effort. This is particularly Karen and myself driving it, that Saturday day and Wednesday evening should be the in-person CRC. Not that we can't do things on other
Right.
days, but these are the days already when we have security here. These are the moments when there's kids in the building. And I don't know, I always think one of the really special things about synagogue life is it's one of the few places that's truly intergenerational.
Mhm.
So the idea would be that to really lean into that. So we're looking at all sorts of, potlucks and Shabbat lunch kind of activities on Saturday days.
Wonderful.
And then this class will be for adults at 5 o'clock during Hebrew school, so that the parents of the kids can also come. But then also having other programming on Wednesdays. We have someone who wanted to do a yoga thing at 6 o'clock, and so having those two in person roots in
Is there
the,
gonna be another concerts before the holidays?
not before the holidays, but after. We've got a whole bunch of them scheduled. Yep.
I just love it.
Oh yeah, I love doing the
Love it,
music.
Shad.
I know. Yep. Okay, welcome back together, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Is it coming through? Great. This is for those who just joined, this is the first use of part of our new streaming setup with the owl. It's not fully there yet, so
Very cute.
everyone here can't see you all yet, but hopefully that is coming soon. And there's wires everywhere. Oh my God, there's wires everywhere. But again, Zoomers, you can't see that, so it looks very nice and clean for you. Welcome back together. First, let me just open any lingering thoughts or questions or anything like that from last week, from the last few weeks, from what we've been doing. Any thoughts, anything? Okay. So we looked at some particular personalities last week, but the big idea of this, what we call the Spanish Golden Age, I'm gonna hit the mute all button as always, feel free to unmute yourself. But the big idea that we centered on last week was that the Spanish Golden Age has, you can tell how good or bad things are going based on how rationalist or mystical the teachings, philosophy, Judaism, Torah, poems, erotica, whatever. It's all the same people writing all of these things. You can really tell the politics through the rational to the mystic, with rationalism really having its peak during the era of peace, prosperity, pluralism. Again, these are relative terms here. And that's most associated with Islamic control of Spain. And the opposite being true of Christian control of Spain, which comes later and leads to more mysticism. So we talked about this broadly sociologically, that when things are really good and it's easy to have hope, then you can lean into a rationalist philosophy. A rationalist God like Maimonides, not that Maimonides is God, but the God of Maimonides, that's not of comfort when you are suffering. It's not of comfort when you are personally suffering. It's not of comfort when you as a people are suffering. Little out of our timeline here, but one of my rabbis, David Hartman of a blessed memory, who I first really in depth learned Maimonides from, was an ultra rationalist Maimonidean. And as he was dying, he had a terrible case of Parkinson's. As he was dying, he used to talk about how he had a God who brought him no comfort. And I think about that a lot. And so we can see that in the personal example of David Hartman of a blessed memory, but I think we can hopefully all understand it broadly as well when it comes to the Spanish Golden Age. Does that make sense? Any thoughts on that? Any reactions to that? Any confusion? So
That's so interesting though, because he had a God who brought him no comfort, but it was his idea of this God that he.
yeah, he was an ultra rationalist and kind of sad about it by the end.
Kind of denied himself.
Well, I don't know how much comfort believing in somebody who is just a big version of,
Yeah.
Of yourself
Yeah.
is,
I don't think
Yeah.
that,
But if you genuinely believe in a God who can and does intervene in response to prayer, in a response to the observance of the mitzvot, right? We've been reading Deuteronomy in our weekly Torah portions, and to jump way back in time to sort of who wrote the Bible stuff of the story of us. Deuteronomy was very much the answer of bad happens because you don't keep the commandments, good happens because you do. But even then, right, this is not, it's easy to think of that as a pre-modern philosophy or as an ancient that we dismiss. But we have Kohelet, we have Ecclesiastes at the same time, which is sort of the exact opposite, right? It's the rationalism, it's the who knows about any of this. And even today, in secular examples, we have this exact same thing. I've used this example before, but the first thing someone always says when you hear that, God forbid, someone has lung cancer is, oh, I didn't know they were a smoker. Again, this is part of that same broad human attempt to explain and to give power to us. I mean, that's a big part of it too. Okay. Spanish Golden Age. This makes sense. We're all on the same page. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about the Inquisition. And we are going to go backwards and look at some of the texts of the Golden Age and of the late Golden Age. Really dive into this civilization just a little bit more. We're going to look at some poems. We've got some perhaps pictures or drawings of Maimonides. We'll look at, we're going to dive into some of these pieces as well, just to experience the literature of these people. I was struck once again in preparing for this class by how much the narrative of the Holocaust as an exception and an exceptional event is a broken narrative. You can start basically in the year 1000 in Christian Europe, and the Holocaust fits right into what is happening. It fits right into everything that had happened. In fact, one of the really, we'll get there. We'll get there. Let's talk Inquisition for a moment. So there are hundreds of thousands of Jews living in the Iberian Peninsula. I've seen numbers that range up to 1 million or even 1.5 million Jews, probably a population of around 7 million. All of these numbers that I'm giving you are incredibly wide estimates, including the 7 million total here that we're talking about, because people are just kind of making best guesses. But that's a substantial population of Jews, one of the densest populations of Jews in the world that exist during this moment. By the time we get into the late 1300s, we think there's probably no more than 500,000 Jews or so living in the Iberian Peninsula. And by the time we get into the beginning of the 1400s, of those 500,000, 200,000 of them are still Jews, 300,000 of them are conversos. So let's just talk about a few terms here. Conversos and crypto Jews. Both of these are problematic ideas for all sorts of reasons. Conversos are those of Jewish descent who converted, almost none of them truly of their own free will, but who converted to Christianity, to Catholicism under various levels of duress. Sometimes we are talking about social duress. Sometimes, more frequently, we are talking about threats of death or loss of property or the kidnapping of your children, or these are the sorts of forms of duress that we see during this time period. Crypto Jews is even more problematic of a term. Crypto Jews refers to Jews who continue to practice Judaism even though they are conversos. The reason this is so problematic is accusations of being crypto Jews was a way to racially discriminate against ethnic Jews who had become conversos. All of these words are problematic, including ethnic Jews, but we're just going to have to stick with language that makes sense here, so I apologize. But please interrupt if you have thoughts or, yeah, Larry.
Is Marano's just another label? Is Marano's the same as conversos, or is there a distinction?
Yes, I believe so. And at various time periods, people prefer one or the other. But yeah, we'll be using conversos and crypto Jews here, but not for any particular reason other than those are the academic terms that you tend to find. Oh yeah, Miriam.
Did the conversos or the Maranos or the crypto Jews organize themselves as their own communities and stick together as an identity?
Yeah, great question. So this is a little different in the various Spanish kingdoms because we are not talking about one kingdom by and large. We're talking about lots of little kingdoms that are all around during this time period. So it's different in each of these communities. It tends to be about outside pressure rather than internal decision making. So there are places where these folks are more integrated. There are places where these folks are not at all integrated. We find groups of these conversos who, at least in the historical record, in some of the writings we have left of them, talk about the incredible pride they have in being just like their savior, Christians of Jewish ethnicity. Which you can, if you genuinely come to a place where you are a believer in the Christian mythology, in the Christian theology, I didn't mean that in a dismissive way, I meant that in the way we use that word mythology here, then you can see why that would be a point of pride. That
Did
becomes
they stick together across political boundaries so that, like, conversos in this kingdom?
No, we don't see a
That sense.
converso movement or group, and it tends to disappear pretty quickly. So conversos as an idea and as a phenomenon peaks in the early 1400s. By the time we get to the late 1400s into the 1500s, the peak of the Inquisition era, conversos are basically treated as crypto Jews by default. Crypto Jews here being, well, this you can see some of the classical anti-Semitism, right? They are secretly undermining our society. They pretend to be us, and yet they are not like us. They claim to be Christians and Spaniards, but that's only because they can fake looking like us. There's absolutely some resonance here in terms of the racialization of Jews in Europe in the Holocaust era. There's some resonance here to what some scholars have referred to as the conditional whiteness of white Ashkenazi Jews. You can see lots of shading in ways that this exists into the future. But so by the time you get to 1500 or so, unless you were a converso who goes back many generations, you were treated as a suspect crypto Jew. Make sense? Yeah, Mary.
But I mean, I first really thought about it when I was, I don't know, it's just some historical stuff in Spanish colonial New Mexico around the time of the Pueblo Rebellion. There was an identifiable crypto Jewish community. This would have been in the early 1700s.
Yep.
That somehow played some role in that.
So there tend not to be identifiable converso communities, but there are identifiable crypto Jewish communities. And now we're using that phrase not as a pejorative as it would have been used by those discriminating against them, but instead as a self-identity. That there are all sorts of groups of Jews who continue to practice their Judaism and their continue to feel Jewish, but do so in secret. I think I've shared the story of my college girlfriend here before, but I'll share it again. Her name is Cristina Calderon. Cristina, obviously quite Catholic. She's from El Salvador. Calderon. Anyone know any Calderons?
Calderon, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, there's an Americanized version. There's a wonderful former member of the Knesset, Ruth Calderon, who also wrote the book A Bride for One Night. Does anyone have that? We'll do one of the months of Beit Midrash. We'll do just on A Bride for One Night. She takes Talmudic stories of women and rewrites them midrashically. It's gorgeous, just an incredible volume. And maybe we can get her to zoom in. She's one of my teachers from Hartman.
Oh, that would be
So I adore her. But Calderon, Rudy, I see your hand. Give me 1 second. Calderon is a last name associated with conversos or crypto Jews. So anyways, my college girlfriend, Cristina Calderon, and her very Catholic essence was part of why we did not end up working out. However, her family had a custom that the women would go into a closet on Friday nights and light 2 candles. You ask them, is this religious? They'd say, no, it's not. It has nothing to do with Catholicism.
family.
Oh, is this about the saints? No. It has nothing to do with the saints. Oh, why do you do it? Well, I do it because my mother did it, and she did it because her mother did it, and she did. The point being that there are remnants of, and again, here we're using crypto Jew as sort of a resistance terminology here now. There are remnants of these crypto Jews and crypto Jewish culture that last well beyond the memory of being crypto Jews or coming from them. So someone mentioned something about the American Southwest. Larry, was that you who said that? Someone said it. Anyhow, this is a whole phenomenon that rabbis in the American Southwest find of people who discover that they come from crypto Jews and want to convert back. It's very right. Every rabbi in every synagogue encounters some version of this, where there will be someone who has a Jewish grandparent, or they do 23andMe and it gets them curious, and all of a sudden they're on a conversion path. This is a relatively frequent occurrence, to the point where you'll find people who become Jews by choice, who the 2.5% of Ashkenazi DNA that shows up on there becomes a real point of meaning and pride for them. But regardless, we see the ways that this passes through time and history. Rudy, then Marilyn.
I like calzone pizzas. Is that what you mean?
Very similar. Very good. Marilyn.
Okay.
Oh, folded but hidden. That's so good. Yeah. Yeah. Marilyn.
This is an aside, but Calderon is a name in El Salvador. But it's interesting that there's a very large Palestinian population in El Salvador also.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
The current president is part of that community.
Huh.
So they have their own political party and have been presidents quite frequently in recent years. It's a very interesting. I think they must have come during the time of the British Mandate, but I don't know. I was
Interesting.
head of the Communist Party.
There you go. A proud Jewish tradition too. Communist parties.
There you go. There we go.
Rabbi Daniel.
Yes, I hear him. Oh, Thomas. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever told you this before, but this is a good time. My mom, my mom is of Hispanic descent, and her relatives are from New Mexico. And she had an aunt who apparently lit candles every Friday night, and no one knew.
Right. See, exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Thomas. And you find these stories all over, and there's some other examples too. Markings on doorposts that you get, not mezuzahs, but you would have like a swath of paint you'd put on the corner of your doorposts. Again, not religious, not saints, and not Jewish.
Just what you did.
These remnants. Okay, so the Inquisition peaks in 1492. You can remember this because in 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue, and Spain ethnically cleanses all of its Jews too. What's distinctive about that date is that's when, right, the rhyme works. It helps. What's distinctive about that date is that is when Jews had to flee and be out of the kingdom, or they had to have reconverted and gone through the Inquisition to prove the validity of their conversion, that they weren't secretly crypto Jews. So why did the Spanish Inquisition happen is one of these questions with 1,000 answers. And often the answer given has as much to say about the politics and ideology of the scholar as it does with anything from the past. So 100 years ago, the answer was almost always that it had to do with economics. This is a sort of Marxist read on what had happened. Or perhaps that it was a class distinction that was happening, and that's really what was going on and why the Jews were expelled, that the Jews functioned as a bourgeois class that's, kicked out of the peninsula. This has mostly fallen out of favor as an explanation, primarily because when we look at who left and who didn't, wealthy Jews converted and stayed by and large, and less wealthy Jews fled without conversion, or converted and then fled. So that has mostly been thrown out as a thesis for why this happened. Also, theology, right? For a long time, Jews were thrown out because they were heretics. Certainly, this is a part of the discourse that you see from this time period. But more and more, I would say that scholars discount theology as a driving notion in anything, and instead see theology as downstream of cultural, sociological, political, economic, etc. Forces. This is much easier to see today, always today, right? Wherever you sit, it's easier to see today than it is to imagine in the past. So just think about, and it's always easier to see in other people than it is to see in ourselves. So think about evangelical Christians and MAGA, right? We can see that the theology is downstream of this. Or look at the way that abortion becomes a social issue as a political issue before it becomes a theological issue, and then happens afterwards. We can even go back in time, right? Remember King Josiah and the rules of centralizing the temple into Jerusalem? We can see this as a power and economic move, and then see the way that the texts flow from there. Did that all make sense, what I just said? So theology has mostly also been discounted as a explanation for the Spanish Inquisition. So here's the explanation that made the most sense to me, and it's a combination. The first is that the Spanish Inquisition, and I am very much using the Inquisition not in a technical sense. I am not talking about the manifestation of the Catholic Church that was the actual Inquisition. When I am using the phrase Inquisition right now, I'm talking broadly the ethnic cleansing and expulsion of Jews and Jewish culture and Jewish society from the Iberian Peninsula over the course of, call it 1300 to 1500 or so. Again, that is not technically the Inquisition, but when I'm using that word, that today, at least that's what we are talking about. The Inquisition wasn't exceptional. In fact, what was exceptional about the Inquisition was it was the last of these to occur in Europe. So I'm just going to read.
It was 200 years after the expulsion of Jews from England.
Yeah, right. So I'm going to give you some dates real quick. Jews are expelled from England in 1290, from France in 1394, in 1421 from Vienna, in 1424 from Linz and Colonia, in 1439 from Augsburg, in 1442 from Bavaria, in 1485 from Perugia, I have no idea where that is, in 1486 from Vicenza, in 1488 from Parma, it's a loss of cheese, 1489 from Milan and Lucca. Oh, I was in Lucca about 8 years ago. In 1493 from Sicily, and 1494 from Florence, 1498 from Provence. So when we look at it in this context, the expulsion of Jews from Spain is just a part of the broad ethnic cleansing of Jews from Christian Europe that has
Which is why you
occurred.
say that the Holocaust is not.
Which is why the Holocaust is not exceptional. Yeah, we're gonna.
Was conversion an answer to allow those, or?
Sometimes conversion is an answer.
Mhm.
Sometimes Jewish converts to Christianity are treated as crypto Jews.
Mhm.
Yeah, right. Oh, you just converted because you had to, so we can't trust you.
Right. Very Trumpy.
Yeah, right. We made you convert, so we can't trust your goodwill and conversion because clearly you did it under duress, and we know that because we were the ones duressing you. It's the whole thing.
Yeah.
But the other way of saying this is that you can see that Jewish identity is more racialized than theologized. That's one of the pieces that comes through as a part of this. Again, race and religion are concepts and constructs that don't exist during this moment like they do today. So I'm just using the social constructs of this moment that seem closest to that. Marilyn.
Can you
Oh,
can you repeat that? The
race and
yeah.
The idea of whiteness is 400 or 500 years old, maybe even less than that. The idea of a religion is like 300 years old. These are ways of dividing people up that we treat as built into society, but in fact are totally socially constructed. They're different in different times and places. Almost anywhere you tribe, yeah, tribal is a good word here too, right? Because the tribal piece is what you get everywhere. And that's the reality. You can go to any human society anywhere at any time and find human created, socially constructed ways of dividing and discriminating against people. And those categories are usually treated as essential, like blackness and whiteness in America, even as they are new ways of dividing up human beings. But the dividing people up seems to happen everywhere. And that's why that tribal word is helpful there. Marion.
It had been my understanding that some of those expulsions were related to usury, or the fact that Jews had lent money and that was a factor, was kicking them out. Like they used that to raise money for the First Crusades and all. Any evidence, you get those stories about Catherine, about them joining forces to sell their jewels, to give to Columbus to fund his boats. If you make that more sophisticated, that you're developing a culture that wants to be on the world stage and is looking for money. Is there an element of that in this one also?
So yes, and we're going to talk about court Jews as we keep moving forward, as it becomes more of a phenomenon than even we're talking about during this time. But there is a pattern that happens where Jews lend money to monarchs. And remember, Jews end up as money lenders, first of all, because we're allowed to. Secondly, because often we're forced into that. And third, and now we're going to sound like a anti-Semitic conspiracy, but Jews are a globalist international communication network prior to that existing outside of the Jewish community. So you could take a loan as a monarch 1,000 miles away and repay it in this other location because of the way that this network operated. So there is a pattern that happened. I know, isn't that interesting? There's a pattern that happens again and again where local monarchs, and again, we're not talking about the king of Germany or the king of Spain. That doesn't exist. We're talking really regional. King of Cordoba. That's the kind of scale we're talking about. The king of Lucca, where these folks would borrow huge sums of money from Jews, be unable to repay it, whip up anti-Semitic mobs as a way of avoiding paying off their debts. So that certainly has a role and a place in this, Marion. But I actually want to put that into a broader context here too, because, and this is the other piece that, again, you can see the way that the Holocaust operated as just a part of this pattern rather than exceptional, that the laws begin not by kicking out Jews, not by forcing us to convert, but by requiring us to only be in a certain set of occupations. And then it was requiring that we only live in a certain set of places. And then it was, we can only participate in a certain set of social activities. And then it is, we can only fraternize amongst ourselves and can't spend time with non-Jews. And then it is, you have to wear a gold star when you are out in public. Right? It sounds like you're describing Germany.
Yep.
And that's what I think is so important about this, is that we shouldn't think that this sounds like Germany. We should think that Germany sounds like this.
Mm-hmm. And just a side note on the globalist content and
that
how
was an intentional anti-Semitic
I
dog whistle, by the way, that Josh Hawley uses all the time.
Oh,
without
What?
that intent, though, it's my understanding that there's historical proof that Christopher Columbus wanted to have his translator be a Jew because he thought he was going to the East Indies or China, and he assumed that Jews would have someone
Jews would have
to talk
connections.
to and translate with.
Yeah. So you get some of that. The other piece that goes along with that is whether or not there were actual Jews on Columbus's early trips. Jews are amongst the earliest people to set sail towards the Western Hemisphere because we were being kicked out. And so we were getting on every boat we could. By the way, anyone know the main destination, particularly in the 1400s, early 1500s, of Jews from the Iberian Peninsula?
Cuba,
Algeria.
Algeria.
Really?
Okay.
Yeah. So that today, a pretty significant percentage of French Jews are brown-skinned Algerian Jews, who, after the French colonization of Algeria, so on and so forth, there were some more hands.
Rabbi Daniel, hi, Jason.
Oh,
here.
Jason, yeah, I knew I'd seen a hand.
No
Someone,
worries.
please.
Your explanation of the reframing exceptionalism in regard to the Holocaust seems so self-evident, and yet I'd never thought of it. Is that
Same.
It's the entire construct of our worldview in 2024 as American Jews is, this is not a class on the Holocaust, I realize that, but I'm just
But
curious.
it will be. We're going to get to the Holocaust.
We
we're on our
are.
way there.
I've never heard that before, and yet it just strikes me with the force of revelation. Is
Definitely
that a widespread contemporary revisionist analysis or no?
I am hopeful that it is widespread and that you can find it in other spaces. I will tell you, up to this point, it comes from me and my rereading of Jewish history through the story of us. And this is a reframing that I'm doing in this telling of the story of us that I have not done in the past. It just feels so, like you said, it just feels so obvious when you start looking at this. You start looking at the way that these laws come about, the escalation, yeah.
But you would also say that there are waves and peaks of this. Too.
Absolutely.
It's not always as intense as it was during.
Yeah, up and down, up and down. So, Leslie. I really thought we were going to look at all these texts, by the way. I was really optimistic about this. Leslie.
Listening to the radio the other day, and I heard something that just completely astounded me. Italy actually became a country in 1861.
Yeah, Italy and Germany are late countries. They're very connected to the rise of fascism.
I mean, I was shocked. You know, when I thought
you don't go to the opera. Verdi was one of the people who was saying, "Hey, we should all be Italian."
I know.
So
he was a patriot.
Hold on, I want to hold it right there because this actually is the perfect introduction to what I was about to say. I almost didn't call on you, Leslie, because I wanted to say it, but that was even better. So we looked at the Inquisition and the expulsion of Jews as being a part of this pattern throughout Europe. But the other piece that seems core to this is that the creation of nation states, the creation of Christian Europe, was the creation of ethno-nationalism and the creation of a unified identity, whether we are talking about the identity of being a Spaniard or being the identity of being a part of Christendom, that it required the hatred, the expulsion, the othering of your minorities to create that identity. And again, we can see this pattern over and over and over again in history, sometimes with Jews, sometimes not with Jews, sometimes Jews doing it, like all the things, but we can see this again and again. And so in that sense, just as, you know, for many of us who have studied history, it becomes self-evident the connection between Italy and Germany as the last unified European states and those two places as being the homes of European fascism. I think we can also connect the expulsion of Jews from the Iberian Peninsula to the exact same cultural phenomenon in the 1400s and 1500s. The creation of Christian Spain required the ethno-nationalist expulsion of minorities.
And in a later time, Napoleon was a countervailing force.
Because we're going to get there. We're going to get to Napoleon for sure. Napoleon's the great liberator of European Jews, by the way, for those who don't realize this.
In 1806, he was the first European ruler to give Jews citizenship.
Yeah.
1806 in France.
Not quite the first, but yeah, he did it throughout Europe. Yeah. Pretty wild.
I wanted to say that Spain became a country in 1492. Literally became a country in 1492. They got the Moors had been there for 800 years. They got rid of them, so might as well get rid of us.
And there you go. It all circles back around. There was another hand I saw. Rothenberg's, is that a hand or is that just adjusting glasses? Rudy.
Is that, I thought Columbus sailed the ocean in America in 1492. Now Spain.
All of these are happening at the same time.
What kind of Jews are they? Okay.
So all these are connected. I mean, they really are. We treat them as separate, and I have that little joke line that rhymes, but they're connected, right? The expansionism, the colonialism, the colonial project, the creation of the state, the creation of an ethno-nationalist identity, ethno-religious nationalist identity, et cetera, et cetera. It's all the same pattern that we see again and again in human history. Marilyn.
can you set aside the Catholic part of the Inquisition in this, obviously, in this conversation? But it existed. And it was part of the unification or the way of unifying thought. I mean, the popes are all getting kicked out and put away, and you know, all this stuff's going on. And that goes before 1492 or 1300 for that matter.
Yeah.
I mean, it's more than a salad. It's something boiling.
Yeah, right. And then it becomes obvious that Spain is not the exception, but the late bloomer.
Yeah, I mean, why can't people get along?
And you know what's interesting though is because Spain is the late bloomer here, a lot of these Jews who are fleeing Spain end up in Southern Europe in places where the fever had already
Yes.
or at least was broken a little bit. Yeah. So that's where you get the Jews of Sicily, the Jews of the Turkish islands, the Jews of the Greek islands, the Jews of Cyprus, the Jews of North Africa, right? All of these different locations. The other piece that I want us to see here. Last week, I talked a lot about deracializing the boundary between Europe and Africa, right? And we've talked about the way that when you flip the Mediterranean on its side and we looked at that map, you can all of a sudden, the notion of Africa being one distinct racialized place and Europe being a distinct racialized place is absurd. You can see it emerge during this moment. And it's along those exact same, it's not theological lines, but it's religious nationalist lines, where all of a sudden on this side of the ocean, of the sea, of the Mediterranean, it's Christendom. And on that side, it's Islam. And again, this is a pattern we see again and again. We talked about the Neo-Persian Empire and Zoroastrian religious nationalism. We talked about the rise of Islam in the region and as a pan-Arab religious nationalism. We've looked at this same phenomenon again and again in history. Okay, other thoughts? I don't think we have enough time to really look at much text, but we can do a couple greatest hits quickly. Let me see what we're gonna do. I gotta pick. I have all of my friends up here waiting for us. First, let me just share these for folks who want to go through them later. Here's a collection of poems from the Jews of the Spanish Golden Age. Putting it into the chat. Here is, oh, actually, let me give you a different one. I have a different version of that includes some pictures as well, including street signs in Israel, which are often named after these people. And again, the really interesting thing, and we'd do some real depth on this if we had time, is that the same people who are writing the liturgy are the same people who are writing romantic and erotic and homoerotic poems, are the same people who are doing philosophy, are the same people who are doing grammar, it is the same folks doing all of these things. And their use of Hebrew is one of the distinctive religious nationalist things that are happening during this time.
So is this kind of the intelligentsia?
Yeah, this is the intelligentsia that we're talking about here. Okay. And, you know, I'm referring to this as religious nationalism, just like I was referring to Christendom as religious nationalism. It's worth pointing out, I think, again, this tends to be true today as well, that nationalist movements, when they are the powerful dominant force, have a very different moral characteristic than nationalist movements when they are in a minority discriminated against community. Whether we are talking about Christian nationalism versus Jewish pride in the United States, whether we are talking about religious Zionism versus Palestinian liberation movement in Israel, whether we are talking about Hindu nationalism and Muslim nationalism in India, right? It almost doesn't matter. We see this pattern again and again. So the nationalism of Jews here is a little different, but the use of Hebrew is very much intentional, because Hebrew was no one's spoken language. Okay, and here's a little slideshow. You know what, we'll just do some of these slideshows with our last few minutes. I think I can put this on the screen for people here too. Give me one moment. I thought there was a button to put this up on the screen, sorry. Prepare for the Zoom room, there we go. Sorry, I'm just trying to get it so people in the room can see this too. Yep. UGLWLT. Okay. And almost there, sorry. Share screen, share. Zoomers, do you see this? Oh, you gotta make that go away.
Whoa.
Getting a lot of feedback.
Yeah, it should be gone now, sorry. Okay, Zoomers, do you see this screen share too? Great. Okay, just
Seen that
some quick Maimonides here. Yeah, here's a
Rabbi
statue.
Daniel, did you
Yeah.
post the link for this last one about Rabbi Moshe?
Maybe not, but I'll do it as soon as I get out of here.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not gonna try to do the chat and the screen, it's too much. So this is Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, otherwise known as Maimonides, or Rambam. So we've got a picture of, or a statue of Rambam in Cordoba's Jewish quarter in Spain, showing you just how influential he was and these communities. Rambam is on the old 1,000 shekel bill. This is before the currency was devalued. I think that's the phrase for it. Here's Maimonides on a postage stamp. The bottom right there, if you've been to the US House, has all of these lawgivers across the sort of top circle, and Maimonides is one of those lawgivers. We believe this is his handwriting.
Oh, really?
That's
Yep.
way cool.
Yeah, we think that's his handwriting, and we think that's his signature at the bottom.
Are there
Moshe,
any contemporary portraits in the previous slide? There was one unattributed.
I don't believe any of them are truly contemporary, no. I think this is the closest we have to something that actually was him. An interesting Moshe Bar Maimon. He's using the Aramaic rather than Ben. There's the whole letter from him.
It's like going to the Lincoln Law.
Yeah.
Sorry, I haven't written sooner from Canton.
Yeah. Here's just a real quick biography of him. Again, I'll drop this in the link
Okay.
if anyone would like to look at it. Right, he's born in 1137, and he's out of there 20 years later, certainly. By the time he's 22.
Mhm.
The Almohad invasion, this is what we've talked about without the specifics of when the much more radical Islam of North Africa comes in as a result of Christendom coming from the north. There's this alliance between the Islam of Spain and those of North Africa, and his whole biography. Of note here, 1177, his brother David drowns when he's 40. Maimonides spent months, some reports say years, in bed, depressed.
It's very interesting.
Famous line here from Moshe to Moshe, none is like Moshe, talking about Moses and Moses ben Maimon. I prefer the Big Lebowski formulation of from Moses to Sandy Koufax, but you do you. Speaking of which, Ben Hochman during the High Holy Days, during Yom Kippur, one of the breakout sessions is Ben Hochman's going to talk about Sandy Koufax and Yom Kippur and Jewish identity. At the same block that I'm teaching about what we talk about when we talk about Israel and the American Jewish community, which is going to be about the ways that we draw boundaries around Jewish community and what people are allowed to or not allowed to say, and how we can do better. So you can really pick between those two. There's another picture.
Definitely Sandy Koufax, right?
Yeah. Here's just a broad history of Spain that we've been talking about. This might be helpful for us as well. Visigoths, the era of conquest, Umayyads, that's the golden age basically that we're talking about. Almoravids is a sort of decline in the golden age, and the Almohads is really the end of the golden age. There's the chain of transmission for Maimonides. Here's a Maimonides on a stamp in the Arab Emirates. Isn't that wild?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So anyways, go through here. He's got this section called the 13 Principles of Faith. What I would say about that is the 13 principles are there because Maimonides thinks simple people need simple answers. He's also responding to the increase in creedal ideas in his area, in Christendom and Islam. And if you think about the Guide for Perplexed, you can see that very much Maimonides didn't believe any of these things.
How,
And here's his grade.
how old was he when he did the Guide for the Perplexed?
So great question. How old was he? He rewrote both of his main works, the Guide and the Mishnah Torah, throughout his life.
Oh, okay.
So it's never how old he was when he wrote them. It's what version of them we have a copy of today.
I was
where
looking
in
for
the
a connection
editorial.
with his brother's death.
Oh yeah, interesting. I'm sure that there are
10
changes.
years after the brother's death, right?
Yeah.
He kind of did a replacement thing.
Okay, here's some of the poets. This is the other link I gave you. Shmuel Hanagid, the poets of this area, Cordoba. And there's the streets in Jerusalem. Actually, Karen in our year in Israel when we met lived just off of Shmuel Hanagid Street. On Shalom Alechem Street. In fact, I think she lived at the corner of Shmuel Hanagid and Shalom Alechem. I lived on Ramban, Nachmanides Street. And here's some poems of his. Solomon ibn Gabriel. This is someone, Rabbi Jim likes to tell this story, but I keep hearing this banging. I'm trying to figure out what it is. They're flying bulletproof windows right outside of our window here. So Rabbi Jim likes to tell the story of Shmuel ibn Gabriel. By the way, that ibn there is Arabic. You should see the high influence in the assimilation of Jews into this community through the use of Ibn. But this is a guy who has a whole set of poems that were preserved under a different name as Christian poems, and only in the last 50 years, 100 years, I don't remember the timing, was it realized that they were all Solomon ibn Gabriel.
Huh. So Ibn's like Ben?
Yeah.
It is?
Yeah. And all sorts of these folks, right? The great grammarian is known as Ibn Ezra. We got a whole bunch of his poems there. Yehuda Halevi. This is the guy who wrote the Kuzari, and we were going to do a selection of readings from the Kuzari today, but also you can get some of his poems here, including his longing. One of the things we find during this time period is a rise in religious Zionism. Don't push too hard on those words, but you see all sorts of these same people. Again, remember, we're talking about the rise in nationalism, Hebrew culture, who decide that they want to move back to Israel, and they start going. Nachmanides makes his way there. Lots of these folks try to go there, in particular, try to die there. That becomes a pattern that we see. Still happens, by the way. You find folks today who will get on a plane to go die in Israel. Ibn Ezra, this is who we just talked about, in Granada, the grammarian as well as poet, and a cousin of his, Ibn Ezra, does similar things. So again, if we, I really didn't think we were going to spend hardly any time at all going through my quick overview of the Inquisition, but it was good conversation. So these poems are available there. Let me make sure I gave you all of this. Okay, here are the Golden Age poets. I just put that link in the chat. And let me give you the Maimonides one too. Okay, any last thoughts? Any last anything, anyone?
Any chance of staggering the breakout rooms so we can attend both Sandy Koufax and Israel?
Yeah, there are 3 different breakouts, and unfortunately we can't make it work. The first, you get your little cheat sheet of the High Holy Days here. The first breakout on Yom Kippur is going to be Karen, Randy, and myself, interviewed by Paul Wagman, the president, talking about everything that's going on at CRC, with a particular focus on our vision for what we've been calling the Triangle Era. I think most of you haven't seen this or heard about this, but some folks have. The 3 of us, created a triangle with one of our names on each corner, and then sort of divided up rabbinic responsibilities where we mapped them closer and further away from who does what. So that's what we'll be talking about in that first session. The second session is going to be Ben Hockman and myself. In the third session is going to be family services, Torah study with Becky Zool, and there's something yoga, movement, crafting. There's something
else.
experiential rather than, or artistic rather than intellectual. So unfortunately, Koufax and how we talk about Israel are going to be against each other. I'm actually planning to go to the Koufax one. So okay.
Are they being recorded?
They are not being recorded, and they will not be streamed because they are going to be across the street in the church.
Okay.
Yeah. All the services will be streamed.
And then the breakfast is back here.
Yeah. Breakfast is at your house, I thought, isn't that?
So take notes and then we can share them afterwards.
There you go. So good to be with everyone. Next week again, Tuesday, and then Wednesday starts in person, 5 o'clock, Beit Midrash at CRC, spiritual prep for the High Holy Days.
Thank you.
Get to go home.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Take care, everyone. Good to be with you.
Should we start to prepare